The sun was soft that morning, spreading warm light over the quiet city park. On a lonely bench near the fountain sat Miss Evelyn, a tired but graceful elderly black woman. She wore a faded brown coat, neat but old, and her shoes looked worn from many long walks. In her hand she held a small paper bag full of breadcrumbs. Slowly, gently, she tossed the crumbs on the ground for the birds. The birds knew her. They came close without fear. She smiled at them, her eyes kind but distant. She had seen a lot in life. She had marched for rights, raised a son alone, and now she only asked for peace. Feeding the birds in this park had become her small joy. Then, black and white police car rolled by. Two young officers sat inside, sipping coffee and chatting. The older one, Officer Brady, looked out the window and frowned. "Look at her," he said. "Another loiterer." His partner, Officer Dean, replied. "Yeah," Brady muttered, "probably causing trouble, begging for change." They pulled over near the bench. Their boots hit the ground hard as they stepped out. Miss Evelyn looked up, but she didn't speak. She just gave a tired smile. "You can't sit here all day," Officer Brady said sharply. "I'm not all." Miss Evelyn replied calmly. "Just resting my legs, that's all." Dean raised an eyebrow. "You got ID on you." Miss Evelyn reached slowly into her coat pocket, pulled out a small worn wallet, and handed over her ID. The officers looked at it, then at each other. "You homeless?" Dean asked rudely. "I have a place," she said quietly. "It's just, not much," Officer Brady scoffed. "Yeah, sure. You people always find a way to cause a scene." Miss Evelyn's hand paused as she threw another breadcrumb. She had heard those words before, in a different time, in different places. She looked down, took a deep breath, and slowly pulled out something from her other pocket. A small old cell phone with scratches on its screen. Without another word, she pressed one number. Just one. She lifted the phone to her ear. The officers stood there, watching her confused. "Who you calling?" Brady smirked. "City cleanup, your grandson?" Miss Evelyn didn't answer. She looked forward, her face calm. The birds kept eating. The phone rang once, then twice. Then someone answered. She didn't say much, only a few words. "Hey, babies, it's Mama. Something's happening again." She listened for a moment, then softly said, "Okay, I'll stay here." She ended the call, placed the phone back in her coat, and leaned back on the bench. Her hands rested on her lap. Her face was quiet. But her eyes were deep, strong, and sharp. Something inside them had changed. Officer Dean laughed. "What was that? You think calling someone's gonna scare us?" "I don't need to scare you," Miss Evelyn said softly. "I just needed to let someone know where I am." Brady snorted. "Whatever, lady. You got 5 minutes to move, or you're going in for loitering." Around them, a few people in the park had started to notice. A couple sitting near the fountain was now watching. A teenager with a phone stood still, quietly recording. Miss Evelyn didn't say a word. She just looked at the birds. She waited. 5 minutes later, a faint hum could be heard from the street nearby. A large black SUV turned the corner and parked near the sidewalk. Tinted windows. No license plate, no city markings. The doors didn't open yet, but everyone noticed. The officers turned and glanced at the vehicle, confused. Dean frowned. "Who's that?" Miss Evelyn smiled gently, still looking at the birds. "You?" "Asked who I called," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "I called my son." This was no ordinary old woman. This was Miss Evelyn Lane, mother of a man known in Washington, D.C. A man whose voice could shake courtrooms. A man who could end careers with a single phone call. The camera zooms in on her calm face. She's not just a tired old woman in a coat. She's a mother who raised a storm, and the storm was just beginning. The black SUV sat still by the edge of the park. The engine was on, but no one got out. Miss Evelyn didn't move from her bench. She sat quietly, as if nothing had happened. But her phone call had reached very far, farther than the officers could imagine. Across the country, in Washington, D.C., the office of the U.S. Attorney General was unusually quiet that morning. Behind a heavy oak desk sat Jerome Lane, a tall man with sharp eyes and a firm voice. His name was feared by criminals and respected by judges. He didn't like to be disturbed, except when the call was from his mother. His assistant, a young woman in a navy blue suit, rushed in holding a phone. "Sir," she said quickly, "your mother just called." Jerome looked up fast. His entire face changed. Calm turned into concern. "She never calls during the day," he said, standing up. "What did she say?" "She said, 'Something's happening again. She asked you to know where she is.'" Jerome didn't ask for more. He already understood. He turned to his assistant. "Pull the location from her phone. Get me the local precinct commander. And send someone to the park. Now." "Yes, sir." Back in the city park, Officers Brady and Dean stood awkwardly, watching the SUV. They weren't laughing now. "Maybe it's just someone waiting for a friend," Dean mumbled. Brady tried to act tough. "She's bluffing, just trying to scare." Miss Evelyn looked up at them with a kind but knowing smile. "I told you, I just made one phone call." Suddenly, the door of the SUV opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out. Clean cut, sunglasses, earpiece. He looked like Secret Service, and he wasn't smiling. He walked straight to Miss Evelyn, ignoring the officers completely. "Ma'am," he said with deep respect, "are you okay?" Miss Evelyn gave a small nod. "I'm fine. Just feeding." "The birds," the man turned to the two officers. "Names and badge numbers, now." Brady stuttered. "What? Who are you?" The agent pulled out a black leather folder. Inside was a golden badge and an official ID. Federal Agent Carter, Department of Justice. Dean's eyes widened. Brady went pale. We were just doing our job," Brady stammered. Agent Carter didn't blink. "Is it your job to harass elderly women on public benches?" he asked coldly. "We didn't know who she was," Dean said quickly. "You didn't need to know who she was," Carter snapped. "You only needed to treat her like a human being." Miss Evelyn stood up slowly. The birds fluttered away as she rose. "I told you, boys," she said gently. "I was just resting my legs." Carter held out his arm respectfully. "Ma'am, would you like me to escort you?" She nodded, linking her arm with his. "Let's go, son. The birds will be okay." As they walked toward the SUV, the officers stood frozen. But it wasn't over. Two more black vehicles rolled up beside them. Several federal agents stepped out. One of them handed Dean a letter. "You are being placed under immediate investigation for misconduct," the agent said flatly. Brady tried to argue, but no words came. Inside the SUV, Miss Evelyn sat quietly while Carter made a call. "Sir," he said into the phone, "your mother is safe. We're bringing her home." On the other end, Attorney General Lane exhaled. He had been holding his breath. "Thank you," he said. "And make sure every step of what happened today is recorded. These officers are done." "Yes, sir." Miss Evelyn looked out the window as the car pulled away from the park. People were still watching. Some were recording. Others were clapping quietly. The bench was now empty, but it carried a memory. A moment where power was silent, but deep. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She just made one call and reminded the world who she was. Back at the local police station, things were unusually loud. Phones were ringing. Officers were whispering. Some stared at their computer screens with wide eyes. Others looked nervously toward the captain's office. No one smiled. It all started with one strange message. "DOJ is here. Attorney General's mother was harassed in the park." Nobody believed it at first, but then came the confirmation. The two officers involved, Brady and Dean, were pulled off patrol and brought inside for questioning. Their names had already reached the top. Whispers spread fast. Wait, that old lady was his mother? She looked homeless. Why would the Attorney General's mom be sitting alone in a park? The captain, a red-faced man named Richards, walked out of his office. He slammed a folder on the front desk. "I want every body cam file from this morning pulled up. Now," he shouted. Two junior officers rushed to obey. A detective leaned in and said quietly, "You know this isn't just about bad behavior anymore, right? This is federal now." Richards rubbed his forehead. Yeah, and we're all about to feel it. Meanwhile, Brady and Dean sat in the back room. They weren't laughing like they had in the park. Brady leaned forward, his voice low and shaky. Dean, you think we're done? Dean swallowed hard. She made one call. That guy showed up in a federal car in under 10 minutes. We thought she was a nobody, Brady whispered. She was just sitting there like any other old woman. Dean looked sick. We messed with the wrong woman, man. That wasn't just any old lady, that was the mother of the U.S. Attorney General. They both sat in silence. Outside, another car pulled up to the station. A tall woman in a gray suit stepped out. She had a badge clipped to her belt and a serious look on her face. Her name was Agent Monroe, and she was here from the Department of Justice Internal Affairs Unit. She walked straight into the captain's office without knocking. Captain. Richards, she said coldly, I need your full cooperation. Of course, he said quickly, standing up. I want all records, video footage, written reports, and I want the officers involved brought to my interview room within 10 minutes. Richards nodded. What exactly are you investigating? He asked. Monroe stared him down. 2 of your officers may have violated civil rights, abused their authority, and possibly endangered the mother of one of the most powerful people in the country. That's not just a bad look. That's a legal storm. I understand, the captain replied, his voice low. She turned to leave. Good, because if you don't cooperate, you're next. As she walked out, the captain sank into his chair. He knew this was no longer just about one mistake. It was about the whole system, how it treated people who looked poor, or black, or both. Meanwhile, Miss Evelyn sat quietly in a guest room at a federal building. She sipped tea. Her son, Jerome Lane, the Attorney General of the United States, stood nearby. His powerful presence filled the room, not with anger, but with care. He kneeled beside her chair. Mom, are you okay? Miss Evelyn smiled gently. I'm fine, baby. I'm just tired. My legs aren't what they used to be. He took her hand. They had no right to treat you that way. No one does. I know, she said softly. But sometimes people only learn after they hurt someone they shouldn't have. Jerome's eyes narrowed. They picked the wrong person today. She looked up at him. Make sure they know it's not just about me, son. There are many others like me. No family in power, no one to protect them. Speak for them too. He nodded slowly. I promise. Back at the station, Agent Monroe watched. The footage from the park. She saw the officers mocking Miss Evelyn. She heard the words, "You people always find a way to cause trouble." Monroe paused the video. She looked at the captain. This isn't just an internal case anymore, she said. This will go public. The Attorney General has already requested full transparency. The captain sighed. What happens next? Monroe looked him straight in the eyes. Next, we hold them accountable. By the next morning, the whole city was talking. News vans lined up outside the police station. Reporters crowded the sidewalks. Flashing cameras and shouting questions filled the air. Is it true the victim is the Attorney General's mother? Why hasn't the department made a statement yet? Have the officers been arrested? Inside her quiet guest room at the federal building, Miss Evelyn sat by the window. She watched the news on a small TV. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes were thoughtful. A young reporter on the screen said, "This shocking case has sparked outrage across the country. An elderly black woman, wrongly harassed in a city park by 2 officers, only later revealed to be the mother of U.S. Attorney General Jerome Lane. The Department of Justice is now investigating." Miss Evelyn sighed softly. All this noise. For me? Her son Jerome Lane walked in. He looked tired but determined. He sat beside her. They're demanding justice now, Mom, he said. People are marching, holding signs, calling out the truth. Miss Evelyn nodded slowly. That's good, but tell them, justice is not only about me. Tell them I was just the mirror. Jerome leaned back in his chair, her words sinking. Meanwhile, across town, the police department's press room was packed with reporters. Captain Richards stood at the podium, sweat on his brow. Flanked by city officials, he finally spoke. This department regrets the actions taken by 2 of our officers. Miss Evelyn did not deserve that treatment. No one does. We are cooperating fully with the DOJ investigation. Reporters shouted questions. Will the officers be fired? Why did it take national attention for action? Was race a factor? Richards hesitated, then admitted, what happened should never happen again. But outside, the people weren't buying it. At the park where it all began, hundreds now stood with signs. Justice for Evelyn, respect our elders, power shouldn't be the reason we're protected. A young woman in the crowd shouted into a megaphone, she's not just the Attorney General's mom, she's our mom too. This is for every elder treated like they don't matter. Old men, single mothers, young students, people from all walks of life stood together. Some had never protested before, but today felt different. Back at the station, officers Brady and Dean sat quietly in the locker room. No one looked at them. No one said hello. They weren't just officers anymore. They were the reason the city was on fire. Dean spoke first. Man, see us, we messed up. Brady rubbed his face. We thought she was just some old lady who's wasting time on a bench. Dean whispered, what if she wasn't connected? Would we still be walking free? Brady didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. Later that evening, Jerome Lane stood in front of cameras. He wasn't speaking as the Attorney General now. He was speaking as a son. My mother, Miss Evelyn Lane, was disrespected by people, sworn to protect her. But she's not the only one. This happens to elders, to the homeless, to black people every single day. My position gave her safety, but most mothers don't have that. He paused, and that's what has to change. The room fell silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Jerome looked into the camera. This is not revenge. This is accountability. This is how we build something better. Meanwhile, Miss Evelyn sat on her bed, hands folded. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to be famous. All she ever wanted was peace, to feed the birds, to enjoy the day, to rest her tired legs without fear. She smiled softly as she looked at a photo of her late husband in uniform. You'd be proud of him, she whispered. He's using his voice for something good. She reached for her phone. This time, she didn't call her son, she called the community center she used to volunteer at. Hello, she said. It's Miss Evelyn. Yes, I'm okay. I was wondering, do you still run those reading nights for kids? The storm was not over, but the city had changed. People were watching now, listening, learning. And Miss Evelyn, the quiet woman in the park, had become something powerful. Not just because of who her son was, but because of who she was, a reminder that dignity doesn't need permission. To be continued. The courtroom was packed, not with criminals or lawyers, but with citizens, news crews, and even retired judges who came just to watch. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to Officers Dean and Brady, the 2 men who had harassed Miss Evelyn in the park. They sat at the front, heads down, wearing suits instead of uniforms now. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. Even they knew this wasn't just about one day in the park. This was about years of silence, years of people getting away with it. The judge entered. All rise. Everyone stood, but all eyes turned toward the door when Miss Evelyn walked in. Dressed in a simple sky blue dress, she moved slowly but proudly. Her son, Attorney General Jerome Lane, walked beside her but stayed behind once she reached the witness stand. She didn't need protection now. She had something stronger. The truth. The judge looked at her gently. Miss Evelyn, thank you for coming. Would you like to speak? She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom went quiet. Not a single camera clicked. Miss Evelyn looked at the 2 officers. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. But her voice was clear. You treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. You called me one of those people, but you didn't even know my name. She paused. I didn't tell you who my son was because I wanted to see who you were. Dean swallowed hard. Brady lowered his head. Miss Evelyn, turned to the judge. These men didn't just disrespect me. They disrespected every elder, every mother, every human being who sits in a park just to breathe. The audience nodded. Some even teared up. But, she said softly, I don't want revenge. I want something better. People leaned in. I want these men to apologize, not to me, but to the community. I want them to go to the schools, to the churches, to the shelters, and explain what they did. I want them to see the people they look down on and learn. The judge stared at her in silence. Even the prosecutor paused. You don't want them punished? The judge asked gently. Miss Evelyn smiled. Oh, Your Honor, they've already been punished. The world saw who they are, but maybe they can still change who they become. Outside the courthouse, a large crowd waited. Jerome Lane stepped up to the microphones. My mother doesn't want jail time. She wants justice that helps, not just hurts. Reporters shouted questions. Will they keep their jobs? Has the department agreed to community service? Jerome raised his hand. There will be consequences, but if we only punish and don't teach, nothing will ever change. Just then, the two officers stepped out of the building. Dean looked nervous. Brady looked pale. And for the first time, they stood behind a microphone not to defend, but to confess. Brady took a deep breath. I didn't see Miss Evelyn as a person that day. I saw a stereotype. I was wrong. Dean added, we judged her based on where she sat, not who she was. We thought power only looked one way. We forgot that power can also come from quiet dignity. Miss Evelyn didn't stay for their speech. She walked slowly back to the same park, holding a bag of birdseed. She sat on the bench again. This time, no one told her to leave. Children waved at her. Strangers greeted her with respect. Even the new patrol officer walking by simply tipped his hat. And she smiled, because something had changed. Not just in the city, but in the hearts of people who saw her now. Not just as someone's mother, but as someone who mattered. Later that night, Miss Evelyn and Jerome sat at her small kitchen table. She poured him tea. You okay, Ma? He asked. I'm fine, she said, but you looked nervous up there. He laughed softly. It's easier talking to Congress than standing beside you, she smiled. Well, you've still got a lot to learn from your mother. They both laughed. Then Jerome grew quiet. Did you really forgive them, Ma? Miss Evelyn looked out the window. I forgave them the moment I saw their fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth. When people are afraid of truth, they act like bullies. Jerome nodded slowly, and when truth finally speaks, she continued, even the loudest fall silent. The news traveled fast. Miss Evelyn had forgiven the officers, but not in the way people expected. She didn't want jail. She didn't want lawsuits. She wanted change. And now, that change was about to begin. The police department announced something new. A community restoration program starting with officers Dean and Brady. Every week they would visit local schools, churches, and shelters. They would talk, listen, and face the people they once ignored. But not everyone believed it would work. Some said it was just a show. Others thought the officers would fake their apologies and move on. Even Dean and Brady weren't sure they could do it. Their first stop was a high school. The gym was full, not with just students, but parents, teachers, and neighborhood elders. The principal gave a short speech. Then the mic was handed to Officer Dean. He froze. Hundreds of eyes stared at him. He cleared his throat. I didn't come here today to make excuses. I came to say I was wrong. Silence. I saw Miss Evelyn on a bench and thought, she must be causing trouble. I didn't stop to think maybe she was just tired. He looked around the room. I treated her like she didn't belong. But the truth is, I didn't belong in that moment. Not as a person in uniform, not as a human being. Some in the crowd nodded. A few whispered to each other. Then Officer Brady stepped up. When Miss Evelyn pulled out her phone, I thought she was just trying to scare us. I didn't realize she was calling someone who could end our careers. He paused. But what scared me more than that call was how calm she was. She had power, and she didn't use it to crush us. She used it to teach us. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds, then someone clapped, then another, then the entire gym. But not every stop was so easy. At a local church, an elderly man stood up after their speech. "You think one speech makes it right?" he asked sharply. "You think saying sorry makes my wife feel safe again when she walks in this park?" Dean looked him in the eye. "No, sir," he said. "It doesn't. But I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let us earn your trust back." The man stared, then slowly he nodded. "Good answer," he said. "Let's see if you mean it." At a shelter, a homeless woman shared her story. "I sleep on benches too," she said. "But no one ever stops to ask why. They just want me gone." Brady looked down. Then he asked, "Can I sit with you?" She blinked. "What?" He walked over and sat beside her on the floor. "I want to understand, not as an officer, just as a man." Her eyes welled with tears. No officer had ever said that to her. Meanwhile, Miss Evelyn kept visiting her park bench, not to wait for more trouble, but to watch. She saw the same officers walk by now, only this time they greeted people. They helped a boy find his lost ball. They gave directions to a woman with groceries. They even stopped to check on an older man who had trouble breathing. Miss Evelyn smiled. Real change didn't come fast. It didn't come easy, but it had come. One afternoon, Dean and Brady returned to the park. They saw Miss Evelyn sitting alone, feeding birds again. They approached slowly. "Mind if we sit?" Dean asked. She looked up and smiled. "Only if you're not here to move me along." They all laughed. Brady handed her a paper bag. Inside was a new container of birdseed. "The expensive kind. For your friends," he said, pointing to the birds. She chuckled. "They'll eat better than me now." Dean cleared his throat. "Miss Evelyn, I know we've apologized publicly, but we want to say it here. In the place we hurt you." Brady nodded. "We were wrong. You showed us who we were and who we could become." She looked at them kindly. "You boys still have a long way to go," she said softly. "We know." Dean replied, "But," she added, "you're taking the first step, and that's more than most do." That evening, as the sun dipped below the city buildings, Miss Evelyn sat alone again. Her birds fluttered and chirped. Children laughed nearby, and in the distance, two young officers walked side by side, stopping, to talk, to listen, and to serve. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, because sometimes the smallest bench becomes the biggest classroom, and sometimes the quietest voice leads the loudest change. A soft breeze moved through the park that morning. Birds fluttered near the old wooden bench, waiting for their usual visitor. Miss Evelyn walked slowly down the path, her cane tapping gently with each step. Her coat was clean, her hat sat neatly on her head. This time she wasn't alone. A small group of people walked beside her. The mayor, the chief of police, a few reporters, and two familiar faces, Officers Dean and Brady. She reached the bench and paused. "This is where everything began," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the seat. 1 week ago, a photo had gone viral. It showed Miss Evelyn sitting between the two officers, all three smiling while birds ate from her hand. Someone had taken it from across the park. By evening, it was on every news channel. The woman who changed a department. The power of grace. A call that changed everything. Her story touched millions, not because she fought back in anger, but because she chose wisdom, calm, and forgiveness. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She showed the world something rare, strength through stillness. Now, they stood here to honor her. The mayor stepped forward with a plaque in hand. "Miss Evelyn," he began, "this bench may be made of wood and nails, but what happened here has built something stronger, a new relationship between our police and our people." He nodded to the chief of police. The chief spoke next. "We admit our failures. We've taken steps to change. Training, community programs, and accountability all started because of you." Then the chief turned and pointed. "Workers nearby. We're installing a bronze plate into the stone in front of the bench. It read, Evelyn's bench, a place of peace, strength, and new beginnings. Miss Evelyn stared at it for a moment. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She smiled. Later that day, a school asked her to speak to the children. She stood before a crowd of curious young faces. One girl raised her hand. Were you scared, Miss Evelyn? She nodded. Yes. Baby, I was scared. But fear doesn't have to control you. Sometimes you hold your head high and you do what's right, even if your hands shake. Another boy asked, Why didn't you yell at the police? She leaned forward gently. Because yelling is easy. But changing someone's heart, that takes calm, strength, and a whole lot of love. The room was silent, and then full of claps. In the following weeks, more news crews came, so did letters. Hundreds of them. From families, veterans, homeless shelters, even police departments from other cities. Some letters said thank you. Some shared similar pain. Some asked her to visit and speak. But Miss Evelyn stayed humble. I'm just an old woman. Feeding birds, she told one reporter. I never thought I'd be on the news. I just wanted to sit down. Then one morning, a car pulled up in front of her apartment. It was black, shiny, and had a flag on it. Out stepped a tall man in a suit. Miss Evelyn, he asked. Yes. I'm from the U.S. Department of Justice. The Attorney General would like to meet with you. She blinked. Me? Why? He says you taught this country something important, and he wants to learn more. Days later, she sat in a quiet room in Washington, D.C. Cameras weren't allowed. No reporters. Just leaders, lawmakers, police commissioners, and her. For over an hour, she spoke. She told them about fear, about dignity, about respect, about benches, birds, and broken trust. When she finished, the room gave her a standing ovation. One senator whispered, She just said more in an hour than we've done in years. Back home, Evelyn returned to her bench. Same birds, same breeze. But now, people passed and smiled. Some waved. A few sat beside her just to talk. And Dean and Brady? They came every weekend, not in uniform, but in regular clothes. They brought coffee, food for the birds, and sometimes their own chill.